Good evening, everybody. We will talk today on pediatric and young adult thyroid cancers. You see, the pediatric thyroid cancers, they are the most common endocrine tumors in children and adolescents. Nonetheless, if you see in the exclusive pediatric population, these malignancies are pretty rare, constituting only about 1 to 3% of all the pediatric malignancies. But if you extend the age to around 21 years of age, 10% of all thyroid cancers tend to occur in this age. So it's a small, sizable, and important group of patients in whom the thyroid cancers occur. In fact, if you see adolescent females, the most common pediatric malignancy is a Hodgkin's lymphoma, and the second would be a thyroid cancer. So it's very important problem in this young adults and the pediatric population. Why it is more important is that there has been an increasing incidence in not just pediatric thyroid cancers, but in general thyroid cancers. And in this cohort of patients, we would see up to a 2.3-fold increase in the last 40 years. If you see the ATA, the American Thyroid Association guidelines that came about in 2015, we have a separate evaluation and treatment of thyroid nodules and differentiated thyroid cancers in children, separately from adults. So this is something that's very important. So this is a small cohort of patients, but you see the guideline itself is slightly separate. The biological behavior of these tumors is very puzzling. In fact, if you see, a lot of these cancers have a very aggressive phenotype, which we will subsequently discuss. Having said that, the disease-specific mortality is less than 3%. The management of these patients or these children are largely extrapolated from the adult practice. In adults, we have a few randomized controlled trials, at least in terms of some therapies, especially radioactive iodine therapy, but in the pediatric population, you don't have any randomized controlled trials. So a lot of it is extrapolation from the adult population, but nonetheless, I must emphasize again and again that this population has got an excellent prognosis. What we will discuss during the course of this brief talk is how the differentiated thyroid cancers in pediatric population is different from the adult population. I know we have done a LGS series on thyroid cancers, both early and advanced, also on tracheal resections, and we have dealt with it quite a lot. So I would not go into the depths of the treatment details that is happening in adults, but I will only focus on what's different in pediatric and what's so unique about this pediatric population that warrants a separate series in the LGS webinar series. The initial etiology of these cancers were from the atomic blasts from Japan and the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown survivors. In fact, thyroid cancer is the only solid cancer that has an unequivocal risk of causal association between nuclear reaction and cancers. I would urge you to read one of a very recent publication published in the Turkish journal by Jargon, which says that although the association of nuclear reaction and thyroid cancers is still there, what they believe is this association is seemingly a little hyped because of the fact is that we tend to do a lot of screening in these population, and sometimes in these registrations, some patients who have been in the non-contaminated territories were also included. And also there is this multiple biases, including recall biases and dose-dependent treatment and self-selection biases. So what really happens is, even in the case of adult thyroid cancers, we are seeing a more and more increase in the incidentalomas. So the authors claim that there is no great risk involved, although they do contend that there is a risk involved in the nuclear meltdown. But they say that the risk has been a lot exaggerated because we tend to screen this population very aggressively. Among the other etiologies, even a family history of a thyroid nodule would actually put a pediatric nodule incidence high by 2.5 times. A thyroid cancer in the family would have a 4 times increase in the incidence of pediatric thyroid cancers. Radiation exposure is also very important. It is a very important etiological factor. 2% of all the pediatric thyroid cancers have an etiology of external beam radiation therapy. It is said that most of the radiation therapy are between the range of therapeutic dose of 10 to 30 gray. More than 30 gray, the cells actually die. So they say that the exposure or the predilection of the thyroid follicle to cancer is very, very less when the exposure to external beam radiation therapy is more than 30 gray. Previously, they used to be giving MIBG, there is iodine therapy for neuroblastoma patients, and it was found that the survivors of the neuroblastomas also develop thyroid cancer. So there is an association with prior therapies like the radiation therapy and the radioiodine therapy as well. Even autoimmune thyroid diseases and several genetic syndromes are associated. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar. For example, the P10 syndromes, the FAP, etc. So I'm not really going into the details of the syndrome, barring to say that some of the prior treatments, especially in childhood cancer survivors, predispose to these cancers. There's also the secondary thyroid cancer that is common. That is, what happens is in childhood cancer survivors, subsequently they grow up and they develop cancers, and the most common cancer in this population is again thyroid cancer. Some of these cancers tend to be small, but they again are frequently bilateral. A very recent study published in the European Journal of Endocrinology says a third of the DTC patients, that is, differentiated thyroid cancer patients, occurred by the occurrence of only chemotherapy only. This is something which is a very new finding, and this needs to be validated. But having said that, the authors said that treatment outcomes of the patients of secondary thyroid cancers is no different from the primary thyroid cancers. So all we know is that prior exposure to radioiodine and radiation therapy, and in this series, exposure of chemotherapy also seems to have a predilection for secondary thyroid cancers. And it is very important for us to understand this from this perspective. Again, it was believed that the nodules that are there in children are much more likely to be malignant than in adults. And this is a very important factor. That is, if a child with a thyroid nodule walks into the clinic, the initial studies believed that the risk of the child having a malignancy was much more higher. For example, in an adult, if the risk was around 5 to 15%, in a child it was believed to be around 20 to 26%. But of course, there are some studies that say that even in children, because of the presence of a lot of other overdiagnostic modalities, the actual incidence of cancers may be equivalent to that of the adult, but that there are some isolated series that say that. But by and large, majority of the series say that a nodule in a child is much more likely to be malignant than an adult. So it's very important that you keep this in mind while evaluating a child who comes with a thyroid nodule in your clinic. Again, there is a sex predilection. The girls are 4 to 5 times more likely to have a thyroid cancer than the boys. So a girl with a thyroid nodule in a pediatric age group presenting is much, much more likelier to have a malignant nodule than, say, the other, a boy or any other age group. Coming to the clinical manifestations, about 80% of the patients or the children present with thyroid nodule or associated neck node swelling. Only about a fifth of them would have an isolated neck node swelling. So the clinical manifestations are by and large similar to what we see in the adult population. But here again comes the major difference. A lot of the tumors in children tend to be much larger than adults. More of them are papillary carcinomas. In adults, if you know, 80% of all cancers are papillary cancers. In case of children, the incidence is 90% and higher. So that is one thing that we must keep in mind. And more importantly, in a child, the incidence of cervical nodal metastasis is much higher, 60 to 80%. In adults, the incidence may be in the range of around 20 to 40%, or possibly slightly lesser, but in children it's very high. And more importantly, risk of distant metastasis and exclusively localizing the lungs is in the range of 20 to 25%. So in a child, you have a much more aggressive phenotypical manifestation of thyroid cancer, larger tumors, more predilection for cervical lymph node metastasis, and more incidence of distant metastasis. In adults, there is a lot of association with BRAF mutations, and BRAF now has come in the ATA guidelines of risk prognostication. We also have our series of publication, and of course our series was more into adult cancer, saying that around 40% of the papillary thyroid cancers in adults expressed BRAF mutations. But in children, the implications of BRAF mutations are very, very different. Although in children, they tend to be associated with aggressive phenotype like increased incidence of cervical lymph node metastasis and distant metastasis, they don't really have a bearing in terms of the recurrence and outcomes. And this is something that is very puzzling for us to understand and requires further exploration. We had our series of pediatric thyroid cancers, which we published a couple of years back, and I'll be sharing some of our experience in between. In our series, we found that multifocal tumors were seen in about a fourth of these patients. Again, extrathyroidal extension was seen in close to and more than half of our patients. Nodal positivity, again, upwards 70%. 85% had N1B disease, that is, neck node in the lateral neck was positive in close to 85% of the patients presenting us with thyroid cancers. And close to 45% had more than 10 nodes positive. So even our experience is no different from the experience that we see in the published literature. In fact, in our patient series, about 11 patients, we had around 67 patients, and that was the cohort that we had published a couple of years back. Now we have a slightly more numbers, more than 70 in our numbers. And very interestingly, out of the 4 children who are less than 10 years, 3 of the children had lung metastasis. So this is the aggressive presentation of these children. And only a fifth of these metastases was identified in a chest X-ray. Majority of the metastasis was identified either in a CT chest or following radioactive iodine treatment. One must remain cautious that in the 1/5 of the patients in whom it presents as lung metastasis, a lot of times it is misdiagnosed as miliary tuberculosis. So one must be really cautious to keep in mind if the child has got a thyroid nodule along with a miliary mottling of the lung, to consider lung metastasis along with thyroid cancer as one of the differential in the treatment of these patients. Again, as I said, histology, more than 90% are papillary thyroid cancers. Conventional ones are 60%. Follicular variants would be around 23%. And the other thing is that the diffuse sclerosing variant seems to be a high predilection in these pediatric. I'm not talking about medullary thyroid cancer in this series, so it is exclusively on differentiated thyroid cancers. Again, the evaluation of these patients, or these children rather, ultrasound, again the more common modality. And these, the features of malignancy of an ultrasound are no different from that what we see in an adult. Hypoechoic nodule with an invasive margin, with a nodular blood flow, microcalcifications in abnormal cervical nodes. And these are the telltale evidences of malignancy, be it in a child or be it in an adult. In case of adults, we have what is called as the classical thyroid system, which takes into consideration 5 different points of composition: echogeneity, shape, margin, and the other foci. And we have a thyroid classification for these patients. But mind you, the thyroid classification is called the thyroid, that is the thyroid imaging and reporting data system, akin to the BI-RAD system that's there for breast cancers. It is exclusively described for adults, and that too for thyroid nodules more than a centimeter. When the thyroids was applied to a pediatric population in one of the series that were published very recently in Radiology a couple of months back, we found that about a fifth of the cancers were missed when we take the actual thyroid classification extrapolated to the pediatric population. So in pediatric population, the systems are completely slightly different. Although there is an extrapolation, one must be quite careful in extrapolating the thyroids into the pediatric population. And the good radiologist is something that is required to classify these patients as malignant in terms of the ultrasound-based classification. The other common thing that we do as a part of the evaluation is the FNAC, and that's no different in a pediatric population as well. Again, here is the 6-tier Bethesda system. One must understand that again there is a lot of variation in the results of the FNA based on this 6-tier Bethesda classification. So it's not exactly same as that of adults, and one must be really cautious. So not only you need a very astute surgeon in managing these thyroid cancers, you need a dedicated sonologist who actually understands the radiology of thyroid, and also a dedicated cytopathologist who understands the cytopathology of pediatrics, because they are not exactly the same. as that of the adult thyroid cancers, but nevertheless, the basic principles remain the same. When it comes to management of these patients, again, it's very important to understand this is the meat of the talk, at least from the surgeon perspective. And a lot of recommendations in pediatric cancers, thyroid cancers, is to do a total thyroidectomy for almost all the patients of pediatric thyroid cancers. And I will come to the reasons. As part of the reasons is something that I've told you, the aggressive phenotype. That is, bilateral presentation is in about 30%, multifocal in around 65%. Only in case of minimally invasive follicular thyroid cancer, where the risk or predilection for lymph node metastasis is less, they say that hemithyroidectomy is something that can be done. And the reason is this. There is very limited data, as I said, hardly any randomized evidence. But a lot of studies have said that not performing a total thyroidectomy in children was one of the greatest risk factors for developing a recurrent disease. And sometimes in some series, the relative risk was close to 10. And in many other series, they said that is one of the most significant factor for that affects the disease-free survival or the progression-free survival, which we will come to a little later. So hence the recommendation by all the authors, in fact, in almost all the cases of pediatric thyroid cancers in our series, irrespective of the size, we have done a total thyroidectomy. But mind you, a lot of our cancers, I told you, are pretty aggressive, 85% with N1B disease and more, and a lot of patients, 50% with more than 10 nodes positive. So you tend to see a lot of these aggressive phenotypes. So by and large, a lot of these patients by default tend to receive a total thyroidectomy because of the large size of the tumors, increased predilection for central and lateral nodal positivity, and a lot of these patients, a fourth of these patients at least, having distant metastatic disease. Again, what about micropapillary carcinomas in children? We know that micropapillary carcinomas is a very important entity in adults. In fact, if you see, because of the pandemic of overdiagnosis in thyroid cancers, almost close to 40% of the newly diagnosed thyroid cancers in the West would be micropapillary carcinomas. Just same as the DCIS that you tend to diagnose much more in cases of women with breast cancer. A lot of the thyroid cancers in the Western world would tend to be micropapillary carcinomas. But mind you, the natural history of micropapillary carcinomas in children is not that well understood. Even though they are micropapillary, that is less than a centimeter, there has been a predilection for lymph node metastasis in these children. And that is the reason why, despite being a micropapillary carcinoma, one must be very cautious recommending a hemithyroidectomy in these patients. So, by and large, if you see, by the nature of presentation of these tumors, at least the extent of primary surgery would most often be a total thyroidectomy. And hemithyroidectomy, you would really have to choose your patients very, very well. As I said, minimally invasive follicular thyroid cancers, you can do a hemithyroidectomy. In cases of micropapillary carcinomas in very selected patients, knowing that they don't have a bilateral or multicentric disease or lateral or central nodes positivity, you can do a hemithyroidectomy in a very select group of these children. Again, the philosophy of management of the neck is extrapolated exactly like from the adult population. They say no routine prophylactic central compartment dissection. But I said a lot of these cancers tend to be a large tumor, so they tend to be T3 and T4. A lot of them do have extrathyroidal extension. So by virtue of which the extrapolation from the adult population would be to do a prophylactic central compartment neck dissection in those patients. But as I said, a lot of our patients tend to have macroscopic disease in the central compartments or in the lateral compartments. So they end up having not just a central compartment, but also a therapeutic lateral compartment dissection. And by and large, the philosophy is extrapolated from the adults. So largely, as I said, a lot of these patients would have a total thyroidectomy, so they have to be done in specialized centers. These are young children. These children, as I said, prognostically, they're excellent prognosis despite having an aggressive phenotype. The ATA has actually described what is called as a specialized center. A center doing more than 30 thyroid cancer surgeries in a year is believed to be a specialized thyroid center. And of course, you have these NSQIPs, there's the quality indicators that have been exclusively designed. So they say that doing a pediatric thyroidectomy, in general, a lot of studies actually say that the incidence of complications in pediatric thyroidectomies tend to be higher for some reason than in adults. But then, if you have a very rigorous national surgical quality improvement pediatric thyroid program, then your complications would mirror that of the adult population. So one has to be very, very cautious, and one has to be very specialized in trying to do a total thyroidectomy, especially in cases of the pediatric population. Again, that much for surgery, and there is more controversy in iodine 131 therapy. In fact, as I said, a lot of these children fall under the high risk population by virtue of having a very aggressive phenotype. And so, quite a lot of these patients would require some form of iodine therapy. But again, it's not that all patients do get it. Even in the intermediate to high risk, with a risk adapted approach, if there is no radioactive iodine in the bed, and if your stimulated thyroglobulin is less than 2, even in intermediate to high risk, some of the authors said don't give radioactive iodine. So again, it's a very risk adapted approach. I don't really want to go into too much of the complexities of the radioactive iodine therapy, because that's not really the focus of the talk, but it's very important for us to understand the implications of these therapies, because they have a lot of implications, at least in the pediatric population. In the adult population, we tend to use a lot of the recombinant TSH, but recombinant TSH has not been tested in the pediatric population, although there have been isolated reports that say that it is by and large safe. For less than 18 years, I think the recommendation is don't use recombinant TSH. But again, as I said, with evolving evidences, there may be some isolated reports where the safety has been quite there. Again, when it comes to dosimetry, one must be very careful with regards to the pediatric population. A lot of people tend to use dosimetry to do the radioiodine therapy, but then in adults, we know that by convention, it is an empirical dosage. There have been very recent studies to show that even in an empirical dosage for the prepubertal children, barring mild to moderate bone marrow suppression, which has no much clinical significance, you are good to do that as well. So previously, the recommendation was to do a dosimetry and then plan your therapy for the kids, but now they say that doing an empirical therapy may be as good as well. Again, in cases of lung metastasis, again, this is one of the areas in which we tend to give radioactive iodine therapy. Distant metastasis and extrathyroidal spread are one of the indicators of high risk, and a lot of these patients tend, or these children rather, tend to receive the radioactive iodine therapy. In our experience, 90% of the children had a complete response to a single dose of radioactive iodine ablation, and one more patient had a complete response to 2 settings. Even if the patient had got a partial response, a lot of these patients tend to be stable for a long duration of time. And this is not our experience, but this is experience extrapolated from the literature. So you see that despite having an aggressive disease, lung metastasis, just one dose of radioactive, the tumor really melts. Again, one must understand also the side effects, especially because they are children that you're giving a radioactive iodine therapy and these tumors melt. You do have some side effects of nausea, vomiting, the regular stuff, xerostomia in up to a fifth of the patients. Lacrimal gland dysfunctions are also there. Transient marrow suppressions, these are some of the early complications. One must also anticipate late complications. About 4% tend to have permanent bone marrow suppression, about a relative risk of 2.5 to developments of either AML or CML. Also, about 5% of the patients, especially the pulmonary metastasis sequelae, tend to have pulmonary fibrosis as well. And a lot of these boys and girls as well tend to have gonadal dysfunction or altered fertility. These are very important and for the surgeon to understand, because a lot of these patients may go for such of these therapies by virtue of having an aggressive phenotype. So it's very important for us to counsel the parents of these children that these could be potential side effects of radioactive iodine therapy. Again, second malignancies up to 4%. There is a definite risk of second malignancies, not just leukemias, as I said, AMLs and CMLs, with a relative risk of around 2.5 to around 5 times. Even certain other solid tumors also tend to have a higher predilection in this group of patients. Again, there was some initial suggestion that there was a high mortality, and especially in non-thyroid malignancies, due to non-thyroid malignancies and survivors of the pediatric thyroid cancers. So this was something that was put aside, that it is not that the thyroid, these children die of thyroid cancers, but a lot of these children die of non-thyroidal malignancies. But then this has been a claim that has been refuted in a number of studies, including this study from Chernobyl, which was published about a couple of years back after 11.3% follow-up. In adults, we do tend to have a lot of disease that is called a radioiodine refractory. That is, once they don't respond, and there are about 5 or 6 definitions of radioactive refractory disease. Again, in children, as I said, this condition is extremely rare. As I said, more than 90% of our patients actually tumors melted, even lung metastasis with single dose of radioactive iodine therapy. So in case of adults, you have a lot of buzz about the new targeted therapy, that is the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, and a couple of them have been approved by the US FDA. But then we don't really have much evidence of its usage in the pediatric thyroid population. But you do have isolated reports, like in cases of that occasional odd child who is not responding, who's progressing despite the aggressive therapy of surgery and radioactive iodine. At least in a couple of case series, they have said some of these patients or children tend to respond excellently even to the tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So although it's very rare to have such a scenario, when you're pushed to such a scenario, don't hesitate to involve your medical oncologist and tend to give tyrosine kinase inhibitors in these young children as well. Again, the future perspectives are that you tend to deal with a lot of these oncogene specific targeted therapies. As I said, the tyrosine kinase inhibitors are there. Initially, it was used in the inoperable population, that is the patients who are inoperable. But as I said, there have been a lot of buzz and evidence to suggest that some of these therapies can be used possibly in the upfront setting, or they say neoadjuvant setting, also in some of these large bulky tumors. In fact, some of these tumors tend to be very, very bulky. In fact, I do remember we had almost an 8-year-old girl, and this was sometime maybe about more than 10 years back. I received a call in close to midnight. This girl was in stridor, and we had to I had to really rush down to the hospital and do an emergency tracheostomy to this girl. She had sort of a large thyroid nodule. Tracheostomy doing was very difficult, large bilateral nodes as well, and she had bilateral recurrent laryngeal paralysis, and that is the reason why she went into stridor. And we operated this patient, and we gave all the therapies, and she did extremely well. She had incidentally lung metastasis as well, and a lot of them are in partial remission as well. So the young girl does have, in fact, it's now close to about 8 years or more of more than 10 years rather, yeah, more than 10 years of follow-up. This the young girl, when I saw her, was 8, and now she's college going. So a lot of these tumors tend to respond extremely well, and it's very heartening to actually treat these young children. Again, the aspect of L-troxin suppression is there. Again, there is a debate whether to how much to suppress, because these are young children and you have to give this therapy lifelong, and the degree of suppression, at least the ATA guideline recommends that it is again based on the risk stratified approach. Initially, at least, they say that you have to really suppress for the high risk patients, but after 6 months or so, they say you go slow on the suppression of these. So there's really a lot of debate actually, if you see and read between the lines in terms of the thyroxine or L-troxin suppression for these kids. Again, the follow-up of these children are more or less extrapolated, and ultrasound is something that we tend to use more often than the iodine scans in a case of adults, and similar is the experience in the children as well. Again, in adults, you do know about the ATA response criteria, but the biochemical recurrence part in children is something that we don't really know much. Again, this is the best part of the entire discussion. The survival outcomes is very, really heartening to know. Some of these have got close to around 99.8% survival, 5-year overall survival, and even it extends to the same for about 10 years as well. Even with regional metastatic disease, you have survivals in the range of around 97%. Even with distant metastasis, you have about 90% survival in these patients. And clearly, in localized, loco-regional, and metastatic disease, the survival of these kids is exceedingly well than compared to adults. The only problem is the progression-free survival, and I said that the progression-free survival is only around 65 to 70%. So, as surgeons, what we can do to better the progressive-free survival is to do more radical surgery for these young kids. So, if you do a more radical surgery in the form of a total remove the disease per se, whatever is there, do a total thyroidectomy, do a good central compartment dissection and a lateral compartment dissection as warranted, you would be able to increase the PFS of these patients. Either ways, as I said, is despite the PFS, a lot of these can be potentially salvaged, or they don't really have much of an impact in the overall survival of these patients. So this is one cancer which is entirely driven by a good surgical expertise. A good surgeon would be able to actually give a better performance, a progression-free survival for these patients, and of course, overall survival tends to be better also. Again, as I said, that a lot of about 30% of these patients tend to have relapses, and neck nodal relapses tend to be very common. About 15 or 16% of them was there in our series of neck nodal relapses. Again, there are some factors that tend to sort of predilect these patients to neck nodal metastasis at younger age. As I said, if you have a child which is less than 10 years, you tend to have a much more aggressive disease. Again, multifocal disease, upfront N1 disease status, and a lack of a neck nodal lymph node dissection. So some of these factors predict the pattern of neck nodal recurrences, and it is again, can't emphasize over and over again, it's the quality of surgery that matters. So this is our publication. In fact, Ravi Shankar, one of our boys who trained with us, collected all the data, and we published this in about a couple of years back, in fact 2 years back. And as part of the data, of course, I did present, but again, this is something which is very, very heartening for us. Around 67 patients that we have sort of compared with a lot of other series. In fact, our experience seems to be a little modest. As I said, 25% multifocal, 52% extrathyroidal extension, 71% nodal positivity, 16.55% distant metastasis. Recurrence, as I said, nodal recurrences were there in 16%. And believe me, the 10-year overall survival was close to almost 100%. So the disease-free survival was we just lost one patient of thyroid cancer, and that was only after 16 years. So our 10-year overall survival for our thyroid pediatric is around 100%, and can't get better than that. Again, just to conclude by saying that the biology seems very puzzling, because it's something which is very unique, which was entirely very, very fascinating for me, because these cancers tend to, on the face of it, or the day one, as I said, the girl which was said, I thought that she was not going to make it for long, but then we treated her very aggressively, and she's there 10 years, raring to go. She's in college. She's just one of these patients. As I said, we had 67 plus patients, but this is some patient which was very striking, because she presented with bilateral recurrent laryngeal nerve paralysis, then went on to receive all the radical treatments, did well, and she topped her class, and she's doing very well in her later part of life as well. So this is one cancer which I feel, even though they are very aggressive behaving phenotype, the cancers do really well. Puzzling biology, we don't really understand a lot of it. The effect of BRAF, at least, is something that we don't really know. It's something that we are trying to study in our pediatric population. We did study in an adult, but again, there's some issues of funding, so we are probably not going much more into it. As I said, there are no clear explanations. I can't really explain how these cancers tend to do so exceedingly well. Again, future therapies for some of these patients also was to, in fact, a lot of these have come into practice for the adult. You tend to, in fact, we are trying to do, we are planning to enroll some of our radioactive refractory patients in one of the study of dual inhibitors. Again, RET inhibitors, NTRK inhibitors, and MSI-high, so immunotherapy. So all these things are there in the adult population, and they can subsequently be extrapolated into the pediatric population as well. So to conclude, as I said, these are rare cancers. When compared to the entire spectrum of pediatric malignancies, about 3%, but they are a very important cohort of patients. A multidisciplinary team approach, and it's essentially surgeon-driven. As as I said, I can't reiterate more, the quality of surgery done at the first time actually sort of, determines a lot in terms, at least in terms of the progression-free survival and also the overall survival. Again, we must maximize the efficacy of our treatment and minimize the toxicity again. These are sort of, radical surgery, so one must do it very, very carefully because these children are going to live much, much longer. So we really have to make that extra effort. You say use loops, nerve monitors, whatever to preserve the recurrent laryngeal nerve and the parathyroids for these patients, and see to it that we give them a very, very good quality of life for the long years that they tend to survive as well. So it's a very important endeavor, and I would like to end my talk and thank Dr. Patna again for the opportunity and open to questions. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Arvind, for yet another specialized lecture, very focused. And any questions, comments? I think there's a question or two on the chat box.
No, there was a mention, any difference of treating medullary thyroid cancer apart from the workup of men. As I said, I think in fact, I was planning to do a separate series on medullary thyroid cancers. So later I would tend to sort of, answer that, but it is very important. In fact, about 8% of the pediatric thyroid cancers tend to be medullary thyroid cancers as well. And there is a syndromic association. So you must refer them to your, if you have a hereditary cancer clinic, and a lot of them, there could be an association with any of these syndromes. We tend to do the ret oncogene testing, gene testing for them. And based on that, we need to check whether they are truly sporadic or they fall into either MEN 2A or 2B or any of the familial. And of course, there are issues of prophylactic thyroidectomies. But as I said, I think the focus of this talk was essentially on differentiated thyroid cancers, and we will discuss that subsequently. But then a lot of interesting implications of thyroid cancers, at least prophylactic thyroidectomy, in terms of the men and the familial medullary thyroid cancers. Dr. Lavanya, could you? Yeah.
So good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Karthik, sir.
Yes,
sir. Two questions, sir. One is you said that we have to balance the risk of total thyroidectomy with the post-operative complications. Like in adult, is there any evidence for observing micropapillary tumors? Active surveillance.
They have tried it, Karthik. They have tried it. Again, as I said, the incidence of micropapillary carcinomas tend to be less. And again, another issue of micropapillary are in adults, at least some 3% of the micropapillary carcinomas may be associated with some nodal metastasis and even distant metastasis as well. They say that in case of children also, they tend to sort of, have more amount of nodal and distant metastasis as well. As I said, the biology of these cancers tend to, at least aggressively, they present, phenotypically aggressive presentation is there. So in micropapillary carcinomas, you need to know whether they are truly micropapillary in the sense like, whether they have its disease confined to the thyroids and not spread to the lymph nodes or distant metastasis. So this is a distinct possibility, much, much more in pediatric when compared to the adult. So the experience of surveillance is not much in case of pediatric thyroid cancers. That is active surveillance. So quite often, a lot of them tend to sort of operate these patients.
So second question, sir, identifying, preserving the parathyroid and RLN, you use any specific energy device like bipolar or harmonic, or it is identification and good surgical technique?
I sort of, I don't really sort of, go about searching for it. I have certain landmarks. I use more often the tubercle of Zuckerkantel and tend to sort of identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve. But it's very important to do the parathyroid, save the parathyroids as well. Again, it's just more of inspection and trying to sort of, see and preserve it. The more important aspect, at least in cases of the pediatric thyroid cancers, is that when you tend to do a central compartment dissection. So in that case, what is very important is that after one trick, I would say, there are many tricks, of course. One is that whenever you're doing a central compartment neck dissection, you tend to examine your specimen very, very closely and carefully. sometimes an inadvertent parathyroid will be there. And I would tell that it is not only important to identify the recurrent laryngeal nerve, it is also important to identify all the four parathyroids. And this is some practice which I tend to do quite often. The reason is that, it's not that not seen as something that you can leave it like that. You try to make an effort, and especially in a central compartment neck dissection, wherein inadvertently you might have hacked out one of the parathyroid. So if you, what I would say is that no specific energy devices. Of course, I've used the harmonic in some of these patients, but I'm pretty comfortable using a regular bipolar devices as well. Once or twice on a trial basis, I've used a nerve monitor, never, of course, a loop. But as I said, it is diligence. You must sort of preserve the entire integrity of the nerve. And at the end of the surgery, you must make an effort to sort of identify the parathyroid as well and try to see that it is not there somewhere in the specimen. And in case you have inadvertently hacked out one of the parathyroids or devascularized one of the parathyroids, it is worthwhile to sort of auto-transplant this. So low threshold for auto-transplantation, because I think, again, as I reiterate, these children are very, very long-term survivors. It's in our endeavor that we give them the best sort of treatment. And I think I can go on with regards to the precautions, but I think they are by and large, and these are some of the tips I can tell you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Lavanya says that can you highlight on prophylactic thyroidectomies in children with men? Again, I think a lot of them want to learn about the men, but it tends to be quite fascinating. We have had about a couple of cases of prophylactic thyroidectomies that we have done for men. Again, it is more out of, you must have a hereditary cancer clinic, and ideally all your medullary thyroid cancers should have a genetic analysis or a ret proto-oncogene mutation. And you must label them sporadic only after ruling out all this. From the clinical perspective, as I said, you workup for pheochromocytoma is mandatory. And you may sort of land up in scenarios in which you get MEN2A, MEN2B, or familial. And in some of these, you will have to sort of call back the family. It's a very labor-intensive process. Call back the family, draw the family tree, and then if at all you identify a deleterious mutation in some of these patients, you go about doing the prophylactic thyroidectomies. And of course, there are a lot of prophylactic codons, and I think this is something that you all can actually reinvent to do first year, fifth year, or something of that sort. But I think the diligence is in actually identifying and identifying every patient of medullary thyroid cancer and sending them and evaluating them by a special geneticist to sort of have their family tree sketched and manage them appropriately.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Yeah, hi Dharma. Hi, Dr. Dharma.
Sir, it was good presentation. It was nice presentation, sir. We normally don't talk about pediatric thyroid cancer, so it's really good. I have like few questions. One thing, like completion thyroidectomy in pediatric patient. Do you go for completion or like tend to be like let's observe them and that kind of, because you have a good series, so if you are the right person to answer.
No, as I said, a lot of our patients also came about, I think 30% odd, I am not really sure, I think it's in there in our publication, came having some sort of surgery done outside. A lot of times, some lymph node being picked or some partial thyroidectomy being done for these patients is there. So I think very importantly is to sort of, evaluate these patients very closely. And as I said, a lot of these tumors tend to sort of, typically be pretty aggressive. So we have done completion thyroidectomies, central compartments, and neck dissections in our pediatric thyroid cohort as well. I think close to around 30% of our population was redo surgeries as well in our series. So we don't really sort of, being a tertiary care center, we do tend to get a lot of such patients, and we manage them appropriately based on the merits of these. As I said, in cases of adult, I think there is more and more room for surgical conservatism. Like initially the ATA said less than a centimeter observed. Now the ATA 2015 says that up to 4 centimeters you tend to do about hemithyroidectomy. But for some reasons in pediatrics, it tends to be much different. And this is a recommendation which a lot of people may not actually know much. So that is the reason why I thought it is very important, because a lot of times whenever there's a young child coming to us, we sort of treat them like an adult. But it is very important for surgeons to realize that the implications, the biology of these cancers are very, very different from that of adult. And the extent of surgery and also the lymph node resection needs to be a little radical vis-a-vis when in other cancers, we tend to be a little conservative in children. Like, you have a lot of these fertility preserving options or more and more conservative therapies in children. But the thyroid cancer is one in which I think the surgical therapy needs to be radical, and the efforts are truly very high.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Nothing in the chat I can see.
So no questions. Thanks once again, Arvind, for doing a lovely topic at such a short notice. You seem to be very good at preparing slides. They're very.
It's good. We have a lot of our experience, so I just talk a lot of our experience and add a little bit of the contemporary knowledge. So I think it's
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
See you again.
Yeah. Bye bye.